Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So Rabbi Marlowe got until the top of hey. I want to go back to the Tanur Rabbanan, a few lines back on the Dalet on the base. It's in the middle of the piece. I think we had a machlokes, so we thank Hashem that we're able to learn every day. For learning this in English immediately.
Man.
We had a machlokes between Rav Safra and Rava. And the machlokes was, it made a difference if the person made a statement before the main part of the get was completed. According to Rav Safra, if you made the statement before, then it's kosher. I'm sorry. Yeah, that anything verbal was kosher. According to Rava, not everything verbal was kosher. According to Rava, if the statement was made before the main part of the get was written, it would also be possible. Now, Tanur Rabbanan was taught in the Brisa, Kol Tanam placed in the get. All conditions possible get. Divir Rebbe. And anything that's written in the get is possible, even if it's an almanas. Because in our Mishnah, we said that if someone says that he divorced from me, except from so and so, then then that would be problematic. But if he says a condition, according to our Mishnah, he says you're divorced from me on condition that you don't marry so and so, so then that was a good get. And the Chachamim say, Chutz shepaisel al peh paisel b'ksav, v'chol she'eino paisel al peh eino paisel b'ksav. Chutz shepaisel al peh paisel b'ksav, almanach she'eino paisel al peh eino paisel b'ksav. Which means that what's written in the get, if you write a condition in the get, it's not necessarily invalid. Depends what the condition, what it sounds like. If he says except for, then it's invalid. And if he says almanas on condition, then that was valid. Amar Reb Zera. There says machlokes. This machlokes between Rebbe and the Chachamim regarding if you can get a condition written in the get and the get is still valid. That's lifnei Torah. That's if it was written before the main part of the get. Rebbe Savik does rinan almanas v'tuchutz. Rebbe says because writing something in the get is problematic, even if it's a condition which is usually not problematic, but because if he says except for, you divorce me except for so-and-so, which means that you can't marry so-and-so. So then that's a problem. So if he says on condition that you marry so-and-so, it's the same thing. Rabbanan Savri, Rabbanan say no, you don't have a gezerah. Now all of this is talking about what's written inside the get. But if it's written after the main part of the get, now we're on top of it. Hey, Divrei kol kosher. According to Reb Zera, everyone agrees that it's kosher, even Rebbe. Rebbe held that you couldn't write a condition in a get. Reb Zera explains that's only at the beginning of the get. Afterwards, it's okay, even according to Rebbe. What about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says that if you write in the get, it's invalid. And it's only talking about if you write chutz, aval almanas possible. But if you write a condition in the get, it's not a problem. Only if you say except for. There's a difference between except for or unconditioned that. There's two ways of learning this, that it's the Fnei Torah for Rabbanan. If you want, you can say it's at the beginning of the get. Why is almanas kosher? Well, it could be that it's at the beginning of the get. And Rebbe would say that you can't write almanas, that's why it's possible. And Rebbe would say you can't write almanas. So how does it fit with our Mishnah? How does it fit with our Mishnah? And our Mishnah almanas was kosher. Our Mishnah is following the view of the Rabbanan. If the Rabbanan argue on Rebbe and say almanas is kosher, our Mishnah would only fit with the Rabbanan, not with Rebbe. Iba Yisema, there is another way of learning this, that it's la'achar ha'Torah for the brekal, that it's after the Torah, and everyone holds that almanas is kosher. Even Rebbe holds almanas is kosher. What you learned yesterday was that the get needs to be written properly. Now, once you get past the main part of the get, then the get was written properly. And what happens afterwards doesn't affect the validity of the get. So Rebbe that's strict about what you write in the get is only up until the first half of the get. After that part of the get, then it's going to be acceptable, even if you write almanas. So that could be that our Mishnah that says that almanas is kosher could be that it's written after the first part of the get, and it would follow the view of Rebbe as well. According to Reb Zera, that says that Rebbe has a leniency after the first part of the get is written, then the Mishnah could fit with Rebbe. However, that's just the opinion of Reb Zera. Rava Amar, Rava says, Machlokes le'achar ha'Torah, that no, Rebbe is never lenient. Even la'achar ha'Torah, Rebbe is strict. Torah is the first half of the get. The important parts, what they call the fill-in, the names and all of that. But Rebbe strict even after that. Rebbe Savar Gazrina not to look at Torah. Rebbe says you make a decree. Even after the first half of the get is written, you make a decree that you can't write anything in the second half of the get because you might think that you're allowed to do it in the first half of the get. I'm sorry, I skipped. For Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan hold like Gazrin not to look at Torah, that there's no Gezerah, the second half of the get is kosher. If you write something in the second half of the get, almanas, right? But if the first half of the get, everyone holds that it's possible, that would be the view of the Rabbanan. This is, Rebbe for sure holds it's possible. But according to Rava, even the Rabbanan would say that it's possible in the first half of the get. Basically, this machlokes Rava and Reb Zera regarding which way this machlokes goes. Is it in the first half of the get, but in the second half of the get, Rebbe is lenient? Or is machlokes in the second half of the get, in the first half of the get, even the Rabbanan are strict? Machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanan, Rebbe is the strict one, and the Rabbanan, I can put it in two parts of the get. Reb Zera puts it in the first half, which ends up with the leniency in the second half. Rava puts it in the second half, which ends up with the stringency in the first half. Because there's no machlokes in the first half. So which way do you go? Even the Rabbanan are strict. The summary of this. Okay. Tani Avua the Rabavin Kamei the Reb Zera. Avua, the father of Rabavin, taught in front of Reb Zera. Kasav get al Tanai. If the get was written on condition. Divrei called possible. Everyone says it's possible. Now, that's actually not the way we learned. We learned that you could write a get with the condition, and it's not possible. So what's going on over here? Divrei called possible. Amiflod pligi. There's a machlokes. There's a machlokes Rebbe and the Rabbanan. Rebbe holds that you can't put a condition in the get, and Rabbanan hold that you can. So it says, "Alaima l'divrei hakol kosher." Don't say possible. Say everyone says that it's kosher. Rebbe doesn't say that. So how could that be? It must be la'achar ha'Torah. It must be, everyone holds that it's kosher la'achar ha'Torah. Now, who holds that everyone is lenient after the first half of the get, in the second half of the get? Even Rebbe is lenient. That was actually Reb Zera. So Reb Zera answers this brisa, flips the halacha of the brisa from puzzle to kosher. And that's a major adjustment. And it comes out fitting exactly with the way he learned the machlokes Rebbe and the Chachamim. The Gemara has a question. It says, "Lema hareza pasal v'Rebbe." Why do you have to switch the kosher to pasal in the brisa to make it fit? The brisa said, "Divrei hakol pasal." Everyone holds that it's pasal. that doesn't fit with what we knew, because we know there's a machlekes Rebbe and the Rabbanon hold that it's kosher. So it doesn't fit. So what Reb Zera did was he switched it to Divrei HaKol kosher. That's one way of editing. There's another way of editing. The other way of editing is take out the Divrei HaKol. Say Harezeh puzzle, which would fit with Rebbe. Instead of Divrei HaKol, switch the Divrei HaKol to Harezeh. As I have two options here. Either I switch the Divrei HaKol or I switch the puzzle to kosher. Reb Zera switches the puzzle to kosher and leaves the Divrei HaKol. Gemara says, why does he switch the puzzle to kosher and leave the Divrei HaKol? He could switch the Divrei HaKol means unanimous. Switch the unanimous part and say that there's an argument and leave it with the halacha that it's puzzle, according to one opinion. The Gemara says, Tana Divrei HaKol asniyeh. The Brisa, the one that was teaching the Brisa, he said Divrei HaKol. Kasha b'pasal mechlaflei. Harezeh b'divrei HaKol mechlaflei. This is very interesting. It says people remember if it's machlekes, but they don't remember what the halacha is. So he wouldn't have made a mistake in the Divrei HaKol or the Harezeh. He just he would knows for sure that if it's unanimous, he knows that it's unanimous. If there's a machlekes, he knows that there's a machlekes. What they hold exactly, that he's going to get confused about. He may get confused to say that everyone says kosher, everyone gets puzzled. So that we have to adjust. Very interesting. Okay. There's a new Mishnah. We had a problem with saying that you're divorced for me, with the exception of so-and-so. You couldn't say that you're divorced for me to marry anyone except for so-and-so. That was a problem, because that would mean that the marriage was still intact in reference to regarding one individual. But let's say that individual was someone that the woman couldn't marry anyway. For example, the woman's father, the woman's brother. Said, you're divorced from me, but you still can't marry your father or your brother. She never could marry her father or her brother. So the fact that there's an exception in this divorce doesn't mean anything. It's totally insignificant. She can't marry them anyway. So the rule would be anyone that she can't marry, if there's no such thing as marriage by, and that person is an exception in the divorce, so the divorce is still valid. Let's go a little further. It says, Hariyat mutar shachladim ala almana l'kain gadol grush b'chulus l'kain hediyat observes in single Yisrael bas Yisrael l'mamz l'naf and l'chomi sheish l'kadush nafilu ba'avirat pasuk. Let's say the exception is someone that she's not allowed to marry. But that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as marriage. Anyone that the marriage would be effective, but it would still be a prohibition. In other words, the marriage could take effect, but she would need to get divorced because that marriage was not allowed. A Kohen to a Gerusha or something. So let's say he says, you're divorced from me, but you still can't marry a Kohen. So she wasn't allowed to marry a Kohen anyway. So his exception doesn't really do much. But nevertheless, it's still not going to be valid because exception does accomplish one thing, that now the marriage doesn't take effect. Because she's not divorced, she's still considered a married woman regarding the Kohen. So even though she wasn't allowed to, but now it's effective in the way that the marriage doesn't even take effect. So that's going to be an invalid get. He gives a bunch of examples for those types of cases where the marriage would be effective, even though it would be prohibited. Like a mamzer, which you're not allowed to marry, or a nasin, or it's a funny example. It starts off almana l'kain gadol. How does she become an almana? She's already a grusha. She can't. She could be. What I guess what it would mean is that she was divorced from everyone else. For the kain gadol, she becomes an almana. As for the kain gadol, she was never divorced. Maybe that's what it means. Okay. The rule is kol mishesh alav kedushin afilu ba'aver it's possible. Anywhere where the kedushin, which means the betrothal, would be effective, even though it's prohibited, but that would be considered an exception in the get, and the get would therefore be invalid because that exception has some effectiveness. It does accomplish something. That exception. That now not only is she prohibited to marry him, but she can't marry him. Okay. Klala the Resha, in the beginning of the Mishnah, we said, anyone that doesn't have kedusha, anyone that there's no such thing as marriage, like a father or a brother. So Yishar Chavik, that's coming to include that this get would still be valid, even if it's other types of other chayvik creases, other types of relatives where the marriage is not effective at all. Call the seifa. The rule in the seifa where we said, and to anyone where there is kedushin, however, it's a sinful kedushin, so over there the get is going to be invalid. So Yishar Chavilav, and that's coming to include other prohibitions. Other people where we're not allowed to marry, for example, Amain or Mayav. If the person says, you're divorced from me, but you can't marry an Ammonite or a Moabite, which the men from Ammon and Moab are prohibited. So then, even though she was never allowed to marry someone from Ammon or Moab, so what is he accomplishing by saying you're divorced from me, but you still can't marry Ammon and Moab? What he's accomplishing is that before she wasn't allowed to marry, now the marriage won't even be effective. So because there still is an accomplishment by that exception in the get, that invalidates the get. Okay. Rava has a question to Rav Nachman. Based on what we learned, Rava is going to ask 9 questions to Rav Nachman. Now, all of them are along the same lines. You'll see you'll get the gist of it after the first one, but they get more and more specific as it moves on. His first question is, Chutz mikadusha kacha. Let's say the husband says, you're divorced from me, but you can't marry a child. You can't marry a young boy. One second, a young boy can't make a kedushin anyway. So what's he accomplishing by that? Or do we say, or do we say that 1 second? I know right now he can't do a kedushin, but that doesn't mean that there's no potential of kedushin in it. And therefore, when the husband says that you can't marry this child, there is a type of accomplishment that's taking place because now you're taking away even the ability of kedushin that the person has potential. In other words, is there any effect of the get at all on a person that anyways can't get married? Amalei Tanisua, he says, Rav Nachman answers the question. He says, we have it in the Mishnah. It says, Ketana miskareshes b'kidushei aviyah. A young girl that her father married her off, that now her father dies, and the husband wants to divorce her. Mian was only if the brothers married her, but here the father married her because the father was alive. But now the father died. So it says that the husband can hand her the get and she's divorced from the husband. Amai, how does that work? You have to have the divorce similar to the marriage. Just like the marriage only worked with the father, so to the divorce should only work with the father. Now the father's not here. The reason why she can still get divorced, even though her father's not here, is because she had potential for marriage, even though she was a child. But in the child, like the DNA, it wasn't in what do they call the genes that are you don't see it doesn't come out. Recessive. Yes, recessive. She has in there the potential. for marriage, even though she doesn't have it in a revealed state. So over here, just like when she's a child, she has potential to get married on her own, even though in a revealed state only her father can accept it. So by the divorce, she really has the potential for the divorce as well, because she had potential for marriage. So therefore, when the father's not alive, she can actually accept the divorce directly. Therefore, what Rav Nachman is saying is that there is potential in the child for a marriage, and therefore, when the husband says you're divorced from me, but you can't marry the child, it actually does have an effect, because the child is considered potentially someone that has the ability to make a marriage, even though practically he can't. That's considered. It's a sheer beget. It's leaving out the full permissibility of her getting married. It's leaving out one point, and therefore it's not considered a valid get. Question number 2. Putzman and Olden says you can't marry anyone that's not born yet. Mahu. Do we say that right now the person's not born, so there's nothing left out of the get? Or do we say, but so what? Potentially they're going to be born, and you left out something in the get from what this woman is able to do. The Gemara says, Rav Nachman answers very similar. He says, Tanisua, we have learned this in the Mishnah. It says, Le'eved v'lagoy. It says you can't leave out. It says if you leave out that she can't marry a slave or a non-Jew. We said that's not considered leaving anything out of the get. She's not allowed to marry them anyway. Not only she's not allowed to, but even if she does, it's not considered a marriage. So this get has nothing left out of it. So the Im Isa, if you say that in the future, the people that will be born, they're considered left out of the get. When he says the people that are not born yet, they're considered left out. So the slave and the non-Jew, they could convert. And you see, that's not a problem. Just because potentially they could convert doesn't mean that they're left out of the get. So to the people that potentially could be born, doesn't mean that they're left out of the get. The Gemara says that's not a good proof. Hanaflavli guri kaimi. Non-Jew and the slave are not standing and waiting to be converted. They, I don't know, maybe they'll convert, maybe they won't, but that's not something that's definitely going to happen. But hani l'siuli kami, but the people that are going to be born are going to be born. I don't know, maybe we're talking about they were conceived already or something, I don't know. Whatever, but that's they're in the state of that they're on the verge of being born. That's why it's considered, that still could be considered left out of the get. Now it says, question number 3, Chutzmi Bala Chaysa. Says you're allowed to marry everyone. That's what the divorce says, except for my brother. Chutzmi Bala Chaysa. Sorry. Not for my brother, except for your sister's husband. Now, if her sister dies, it's an interesting halacha that she's allowed to marry her sister's husband if her sister dies. She can't marry him when they're divorced, but she can marry him if she dies. The sister's husband becomes permissible. Yeah, I have a friend actually that his wife passed away, and he married his wife's younger sister. Yeah. So this man, this brother-in-law is left out in the get. You can't marry. He says you can marry everyone except for your sister's husband. Mahu, what's the thing? She can't marry. She can't marry the sister's husband anyway because he's married and married to his sister. It won't even be considered a marriage. Maybe we say, but so what? Sometimes the sister does pass away, and then this man does become permissible. Well, Amalei says, Tanisua, we learned this in the Mishnah. It says, the slave and the non-Jew, exactly like we said before. Slave and the non-Jew, sometimes they convert. Sometimes they convert, but still they're not considered left out of the get when he said you can't marry them, so too over here, the brother-in-law is not considered left out in the get. Gemara says gerus l'shchicha, misa shchicha. You can't compare because conversion is not so common. So that's why it's not considered left out in the get. Because who's to say that they're going to convert? But death, everyone's going to die. I mean, the question is when. But that's apparently death is common. So it's like inevitable that somehow this guy. It's not inevitable. It's something that could be set up that this is something that's headed that direction, that this fellow is going to be permissible. Let's say he says that I'm divorcing you, but you still can't have any promiscuous relations with anyone. In other words, you're free to marry anyone, but I'm still holding you married to me in reference to any relations that you have would be considered adultery, unless you get married. Mahu, what's the difference? Look, she's allowed to marry anyone she wants, so she should just run with it and go get married. And the guy is that something wrong with him anyway. She should just go get married. The get should be a good get. She's free to get married. Let her get married. Right? And so he didn't leave anything out in the marriage. They don't mashir b'bia, or maybe no. He left out. There is something left out of this divorce, and what's left out of this divorce is that she's not allowed to have any relations, and if she does, it's considered adultery. He says, let's take a look at the Mishnah. It says, to your father, to your brother. So what is the case? If we're talking about when it comes to marriage, that you can't marry your father and your brother. What do you think? She could have married her father and her brother. She couldn't marry them anyway. There's such thing as marriage. If her brother gives her a ring, says you're married to me, it's meaningless. So obviously, what did it mean? Elalav business. He said that you meant that you can't have any relations with them. Now what comes out is that if that was the case, in our Mishnah, he said that if the husband gives her a divorce and says you're divorced from me, permissible to everyone except for your father or for your brother, wasn't referring to marriage, it was only referring to the promiscuous relations. You can't have, that would be considered adultery. Has other problems as well. But whatever the case is, you see that it's only not a problem if this is left out by the father and the brother, because you can't have promiscuous relations with the father and the brother anyway. But if it would be someone else, we would say that it would be something that's left out in the divorce, and it would invalidate the whole divorce. Gemara says no. Maybe what he meant was you can't marry your father and your brother. No, there's no such thing as marriage. He says, well, so what? He was talking about if you try to go ahead and do the marriage anyway. He's saying that he wasn't allowing that. Doesn't mean that it had to be effective. Okay. He says, you're permissible to marry anyone, but you're not permissible to have any abnormal relations. I'm only allowing you to have normal relations with your next husband. What's the thing? The Kedarka Alishia, look, she's able to have regular relations with her new husband, and so she's permissible. Or maybe there's no such thing. It says mishkaveisha, that there's a plural in laying with a woman. That means there's more than one option there. And so therefore, if he's forbidding a type of relations, it's affecting her whole future married life, and it's considered left out. Okay.
So therefore it's meaningless?
No, therefore it would be the get is meaningless. He's leaving, is it considered leaving something out of the get, which invalidates the get?
Right.
If the get has to be 100%, and whatever he leaves out, whatever exceptions he puts into the get have to be meaningless enough that it's not considered that he left out any. She's still
So it's a good get.
in this case, we would say that now that it's not a good get because we say mishkavei yisha, and he's leaving out something that's significant.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Tell me again.
Hear me? I have a question.
Yeah, I'm Naftali mute so I can hear.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
I think we learned yesterday or the day before that you hear me?
Go ahead. I'm listening.
Okay. If there's a condition before, whereas someone would make a condition that it's completely asur, as in eating truma or what was the other? Eating chazer, right? In this case, this is also a prohibition, marrying a close relative or something like that. Is there any connection between those two things? Why is one permissible and the other one just the condition falls off?
Yeah, so here we're saying that it's not only a prohibition, but it's something that's impossible. It's like saying, I'm going to marry this monument, or something. You're prohibited from marrying this monument. There's no such thing as marriage. So when he says you're still prohibited to marry your father or your brother, there's no such thing as a marriage there. So it's an insignificant statement.
Well, the same can be true also with like walking on water or ascending to the sky. That is also impossible. Also,
so when in those cases, what was the halacha in those
the
cases?
condition falls off,
We said that the condition falls off. So
but the get is still valid.
the get is still valid. Here too, the get is still valid. Here too, the get is still valid because it's not because the condition was ridiculous. It's because it's not a condition here. Here it's an exception in the get. It's saying you're not allowed to marry your father. Here it's since there was no such thing as marriage to the father, so he really isn't really saying anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
You were discussing the condition aspect, and the condition aspect had to be something that was a practical condition. Here we're saying an exception, and the exception has to be something that's actually going to be significant. Otherwise, if it's insignificant, so then it's considered a valid get.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
We're up to question number 6.
I'm wondering how,
Oops, I'm sorry. I muted you. Unmute.
I'm just wondering how all of these conditions would come out in modern times with the rulings of Rav Feinstein. In other words, if he was able to say that reform or civil marriage was not really a marriage, I'm wondering how that approach would affect all this.
I don't know if that would matter, because what he was saying was that he argued with Rav Henkin about what the concept of marriage is. Is the concept of marriage a religious process, or is the concept of marriage just the natural man and woman being together? Henkin held that that it's considered marriage, and maybe what Rav Henkin, I don't know, look through this carefully. Maybe what Rav Henkin held was that every marriage is considered religious enough to be considered a kedushin, and therefore it always required a divorce. Rav Moshe held that when someone did not get married with an Orthodox marriage, so then what they were really thinking about was that their conservative marriage, whatever that was, they thought that was the marriage. And now afterwards, when they live together and all of that, that's just it's all based on, well, we were married before on that ceremony. So there was really no ceremony. because the ceremony wasn't valid. Yeah, so if that's the case, so Rav Moshe was lenient, and people that could not get a divorce, he told them that it was acceptable because what they thought the whole time, even though they had relations throughout the whole life, and all of those relations were relations of marriage. He said, but you were all relying on the ceremony that you performed on the day of the wedding, thinking that that was the real marriage. And there was really no real marriage. And Rav Henkin held that no, it was ishus. Marriage is marriage, and it doesn't need to have that ceremony to make it into.
So that means all those years they thought they were married, they were really mizana.
Really, we're not. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. You'd be interested in looking in the Sri Deyesh. He had an opinion that a secular marriage requires a secular divorce.
Who is this?
The Sri Deyesh, Rabbi Weinberg. Yeah. Anyway, okay. The next thing is Chutz Me'afaras Nedarayach. He says, I'm divorcing you. You're basically a free woman. Oh, the professor's on. Very good. From Yerushalayim, right? Like Tzvas. I can't hear. You have to unmute.
You. Hey, there you are. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Where are you?
Fed up with you now.
Where are you? Are you in Tzfas?
No, we're in a street called Safanya. It's down the block from where your parents live. We're a couple blocks away. Yeah.
The Moshe, you know what that is? Yeah. Okay. Very nice. Very nice. Okay. We're on 85A on towards the bottom. If someone divorces his wife and says, you're divorced, you're free, you can marry whoever you want, but I'm still holding on to annulling the vows, that I'm still keeping. So he doesn't divorce her for that. Okay, so what's the halacha? She's allowed to get married to anyone. One second. That's a major part of marriage. The husband divorces his wife's. The husband annuls his wife's vows. If he can't do that, then he's missing out on a major part of the marriage. So it would be considered a sheer beget. He left out something in the divorce, and it would be invalid. Let's say chutz mitrumase. Let's say she was able to eat truma because she came from a Kohen family. He says, "I'm divorcing you, but you still can't eat truma." He was Israel. Still can't eat truma. I'm holding on to that. Mahu. Or maybe kinyan kaspe probably means that if you marry a Kohen, you still can't eat eat truma. That's what he means. You still can't eat truma if you marry a Kohen. So he's basically blocking her from eating the truma of her next husband. Puts me Roshaseh that if you die, I'm going to inherit you. I'm willing to divorce you. You can go get married to anyone you want, but I still want your inheritance. I want that. So basically, he's holding on to her money when she dies to inherit this. I could see happen. All the other ones, I don't know. But so when the Suan Alashir, she's allowed to get married. It's a good divorce. They said, what about her new husband that's supposed to be able to inherit her? He's holding that away from the new husband. Says, I permit you to get betrothed in any way, but not with the document. He's divorced, you're free to marry anyone, but you can't use the document in the marriage. I don't know, he doesn't like paperwork, or he doesn't like to see paperwork. So Mahu, on the one hand, she is allowed to get married. She just needs to use money to get married, or relations. Or do we say that no, she has to be able to get married with the document, or else it's not considered a good divorce, because there's a comparison between divorce and marriage, that divorce is done with the document, marriage also has to be able to be done with the document. Because he's stopping her from getting married with the document, he's affecting the divorce as well. He's holding back something in the divorce. Take the Gemara has, I don't know if it's only the last questions or because there were attempted answers beforehand, but it leaves off with the take. The Gufa shall get, the Mishnah says, what is the essence of the divorce document? It says, it has to say, you're permissible to any man. Rabbi Yehuda adds in, that's not enough. It also has to say, Vidain, and this means, and with this, the heavy lechiminai, that you are for me, Sefer Teruch, this, and with this, you should be from, you should be from me, with this heavy lechiminai. This should be from me to you a Sefer Teruchen, the divorce book, a bill of divorce, a Geresh Shavukin, a letter of abandonment, and Get Biturin, a document of freedom from now. Then it's not to marry anyone that you're so inclined. It's is willing. To anyone that you want. Gufi shall get shicher. What is the essence of a deed of manumission, the freeing a slave? Ariat baschirin, you are a free person. Ariat latzmech, you are to yourself. Okay, you basically you own yourself. Now the Gemara says pshita. Gemara says the following is obvious. If he tells his wife that she's a free woman, well, actually, he's not telling her. He tells the scribe to write in the get that you are now a free person. That's nothing, because freedom over there was referring to like work, and she was always free. She wasn't a slave. If he told his maidservant, he said, you are permissible to everyone. Then, how is she permissible to everyone? It must be that he's freeing her. But that's still nothing, because he used the wrong document for the situation. Let's say he tells a woman, you now own yourself. What's the din? Legamri Kamala doesn't mean entirely that you now own yourself, which means that you're permissible to get married to anyone. Or the Malacha Kamala, or maybe he just means that you're now free to work on your own. But she was always free to work on her own. That was the correct document. That was the correct statement for a slave. But for a wife, that maybe means that she's free to work, which means, but it's insignificant. Maybe it means that she's permissible to get married. Amali Ravina or Ravashi Tashima. Ravina says to Ravashi, let's look in the Mishnayos and see if we can figure out what it means. Harayat Latzma. So the Tanan, started in the Mishnah, Gufi shall get shikr. The essence of the deed of manumission, freeing a slave, is Harayat Basfer and Harayat Latzma. You are a free person. You are to yourself, which means you own yourself. If the slave, when he says that you are free, he says, the slave is owned entirely by the master. And nevertheless, when he says you're free, the slave becomes totally free. The husband that doesn't actually own his wife, the way a person owns a slave, but nevertheless, if he's going to say those words, like Kolshkein, for sure it should go free. The slave gets much more free than a wife does. A wife was never really owned so much. But the slave, with those words, is able to go free. So the wife for sure should be able to go free. Amalei Ravina the Ravashi, Amalei La'avdai, Ainli Asik Bachmal. Let's say a person tells his slave, I have nothing to do with you, no business with you. Did he set the slave free? Amalei Rav Chanan la Ravashi, Amalei Rav Chanan Mechuzah la Ravashi. So Rav Chanan or Rav Chanan Mechuzah tells Ravashi, Tashma, let's try to figure this out. Tanya was done in the Brisa. Mecher Abdulagoy, someone sells a slave to a non-Jew. So you're not allowed to sell your slave to a non-Jew because you're taking him out of mitzvahs. And so therefore, they put a fine on this, and they say Yatsa Lacheres, the slave goes free. Who has to pay for that? I think what that meant was that the original owner needs to go to the purchaser and buy him back and set the slave free. That was the rule. That was the rule, because we didn't want him to lessen his the mitzvahs that he was keeping. But he also still needs a document from the first owner. It's not just that the second owner can set him free, but the first owner has to write him a document that he's free. When does he need a new document? If he didn't write him his aina, we'll see what that is in a second. If he wrote for him an aina, then he's already free already. My aina, what does it mean aina? The Kosovo, he wrote for him. Look at when you're going to run away from your new master, I have nothing to do with you. You see that the words I have nothing to do with you is a way of saying that you're now free. Because he needed a deed of manumission from the first owner. And if he wrote an ainai, he doesn't need the deed. And what is the ainai? It's a statement, a letter that says that I have nothing to do with you. Which means that takes the place of the deed of manumission. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda said that you have to say, but this should be for me, this document is for me a bill of divorce and a letter of abandonment, or whatever. So my commitment, what's the machlekes between the first opinion and Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda says you have to get into these specifics. Rabbanan Sabri, the Rabbanan hold Yadayim Shemachich Hav Yadayim, that if you use a statement that's not 100% clear, nevertheless, we interpret it to be clear. What was the statement? The document said, you're permissible to everyone. Now, we don't know if that means that with this document you're permissible to everyone, or maybe I'm telling you that you're permissible to everyone and this is just the proof of it. It doesn't say that this document is the emancipation itself. Well, that would be by the slave, by the divorce. It doesn't say that this document is the actual divorce. It's just saying that it could look like it's a proof of divorce, but it doesn't mean that it is the divorce. So according to the Rabbanan, that's enough. We assume that that what it's doing is exactly what it's meant to do, which is to actually function as the divorce itself. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, that's not enough. Rabbi Yehuda says, let's go back to the Rabbanan. Rabbanan say Yadayim Shen Mechitzav Yadayim, that it's considered a hand. Yadayim meant the handle. It means the words are like a handle, but it was an ambiguous handle. But nevertheless, that's good enough. Even though it doesn't say and with this. So we know that with this document he's divorcing her. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Yadayim Shem Mechitzav Yadayim. That a handle that's not so clear, that's ambiguous, is not considered a handle. The time of the Kasal of a day, he has to say, and this is the Muchamil said, it has to be so clear that with this document he's divorcing her. But like Kasal B'dain, but if he doesn't say B'dain, Dain means with this. Amri B'diburagash, we say that he's divorcing her with his words, with his expression. B'shtara Raya Ba'alma, and the document is just a proof of divorce, but it's not the actual divorce. That would be invalid. Amar Abaya. Okay, let's leave Amar Abaya. It's getting into the wording of it. Okay. Let me ask: is there someone that could do the someone that's